on here. I better go this way. Can you turn that on, please, for me? I just want a brief story about life on a tin can. They call a destroyer a tin can because it's thin as tin and the noise echoes around it just like a can would. Our destroyer was 350 feet long and 38 feet wide. It was a two-stack broken decker. Now that means, you see you have the deck dips down? Flush decks would go right straight back. And we had two stacks, which we had two engine rooms on it. It was built for 160 men, and we carried 260. It was run on steam and fueled by oil, heavy crude fuel oil. So fresh water for the boilers came first. Washing water, that was second, third, sometimes not at all time. We had a galley that was on this here level here. That's called the quarterdeck level. This is a forecastle level. The galley where they cooked the food was on the quarterdeck level, but the mess hall was down one deck. And we had no communication, no intercom on our ship at this time. So people didn't go around and say, supper's ready. They said chow down. That meant the chow was carried down by mess cooks into the mess hall. So you didn't have to tell people twice for any kind of a chow down. We had different duties. A seaman had different duties. You had watch duties, and you also had like cleaning duties. It could be like the quarterdeck on the starboard, the quarterdeck on the port. You might have the forecastle, whatever, in charge of maintaining that, painting it, scrubbing it, what have you. Boats, we had two boats. There's a boat right here and one on the other side. You could have boat duties. Usually these duties lasted for 3 months at a time. You could have mess cook duty. That's the people who serve the food. So there were the different duties you had. Ship's commissary, well, that was a joke. The only thing we had on there was we had a small store where you could buy cigarettes, tobacco products, and pogey bait. Pogey bait is what they call candy. And everything had to be bought in cartons or boxes, because it would only open once a week, weather permitting. Because it was located back here someplace, and at sea, normally, water was always coming over the side here, because as the ship rolled and pitched and the swells hit it, so you couldn't even open the door sometime in rough weather. I was a sonar man. I was up there in the bridge. There's the bridge right there. Behind the bridge was a chart house. And the ship didn't have its own sonar room, so the sonar gear was put in the chart room. Right behind that. Behind us was the captain's cabin, what they call the sea cabin. It's where the captain lived when we were out at sea. Watch duties. Our watch duties on the ship were 4 on, 8 off. Now your watch was for a week. When you had the 4 in the morning to 8 in the morning, and you had the 4 in the afternoon to 8 at evening, you had that for a week straight. And on Sunday at 6 o'clock, you dog the watch. Dog the watch means you step down. Dog comes from, all the doors are called hatches on a ship, and they have 3 levers on either side. And whether it be on the right or left, you pull them down to tighten it, and that's called a dog. So you turn down the watch on Sunday. So if you had the 4 to 8, you would only go to 4 to 6. The people from 8 to 12 would come down from 6 to 8. And those 2 watches would only have 2-hour watches for that particular day. So your watch ran for a week straight. The problem was we had water hours for washing. You had 5:30 to 6 in the morning and from 5:30 to 6 at night. No exceptions. This is at sea for freshwater shower. When you had that watch, you didn't get a shower for a week. See? Now, we did have stainless steel wash basins, and the water was on there at all times, so you could wash in the wash basin, but you didn't get a shower if you had that watch for a week. We had no way of going from the after part of the ship to the forward part of the ship inside. You had to come up this port side deck or the starboard side deck. So it was a trick to get up there without getting your feet wet. Because as I say, as the ship rolled and the swells come over, we had life rafts here. You would jump up and grab a hold of the life raft, the netting on the life raft, or whatever you could get till the ship rolled back in the water, and then you'd jump down and run up again. So it was a trick. If people used to brag, oh, I made it from aft to forward, but didn't get my feet wet today, you know. And we had 2 motor launches on there, one here and one on the other side. And of course we had life rafts down there on the ship. So it was basically somewhat what life was on destroyer. Now, I went in July of '43, Sampson, New York. September, I was in Norfolk, and we picked up a ship there. It was a Navy refrigerated cargo ship that was supplying ships to the Mediterranean. Now, at this point, I knew what ship I was on, but I didn't know where it was and where we were going. So we put us on this here Navy supply ship. We carried about 600 passengers. Yeah, we've known that for a while. And the Navy, this Navy doesn't call this a cruise ship. You know, they put you to work. The first day we're out there, said go up on the forecastle and holystone the deck. Well, I didn't know what holystone the deck meant. This had teak decks and wood decks. They didn't have electric sanders. You did it like they did in the sailing days. You give you a bucket of sand and a bucket of water and a brick. And you put the sand down, and you put water down, and you take the brick, and you just, both hands, and you put pressure on it, and you go around. And that's actually how they sanded the decks on even the old sailing rigs years ago. And that's how we did that. At least one thing in our favor was we had gone down towards the Caribbean across the Casablanca. It was nice weather, and we were topside. Some people were down in the hull scrubbing bulkheads or doing different things inside and didn't never really got a chance to get topside. That was every morning you'd be up there. Every afternoon, they would have, boxing was a favorite thing for entertainment, so they'd had boxing. Well, I soon found out this ship had a commissary that had a soda fountain. It was off limits to us passengers, but it was ship's company. But the people who participated in boxing were allowed to go in and get a soda or an ice cream cone or something like that. So I got involved in some boxing just so I can get down there. You know, and they were using 16-ounce gloves, so you couldn't really get hurt too much. You could get knocked down, but you couldn't really get hurt too much on the thing. Well, we went on over, and I met the Plunkett in Palermo, Sicily, on about October 16th. And that night, well, that particular day, I can see why they were welcoming us with open arms. There was 22 young recruits coming on board the ship. What we didn't see was on the port. We came on the starboard side. On the port side was like a lighter. It's a ammunition lighter, and this ship had just returned from Salerno, so they were low on ammunition. So they were loading ammunition from this here lighter onto the ship, and we were a working party. So they put us to work carrying ammunition, powder, you know, powder cases and the shells. Now these shells came in a wood crate, 2 in a crate, and the shells weighed 52 pounds apiece. So there was 104 pounds plus the wood crate. So it took like 2 of us to lift them off the lighter, get them up on the ship, and then get them down to the magazines. That night we left, and we took the Philadelphia, which is a light cruiser, down, and we were coming from Palermo, Sicily. We were coming down the coast of Africa. We dropped the Philadelphia off at Algiers. See, cruisers could not travel by themselves because they had no sonar gear, no depth charges or whatever. So they always had an escort with of destroyers. We left the Philly there, and we continued on down into Oran. Now, Oran, 10 miles west, like coming towards Gibraltar, was a French naval base, Mirs El Kabir, huge naval base with a big seawall and a submarine net, and so it was like a safe haven, the only place you could call a safe haven over there. And we worked out of there for a while. When we came in, there was 9 troop ships lined up along this here seawall, and they were loading troops on. Well, Naples was captured at October 1st, but it took the Navy about 4 weeks to clean out the harbor and the wreckage that the Germans had left there, and of course what the Navy or the Air Corps had created. So about November 1st, we took our first convoy of troop ships up along the coast. Now, the Mediterranean was infested with submarines, and they had the advantage because the only route you went was close to North Africa. Like the Atlantic, you had thousands of routes you could take, but there was only one route. Every convoy came in and went down along the coast because they had air protection and they had the ship's protection going down there. Now, these 9 troop ships, when we pulled out, we had 15 escorts. Normally, you could take 100 ships across the Atlantic with only 15 escorts. But there was no way that they were going to try to have anything done with these ships. Now, we never did have any problems with the submarines on these troop ship convoys, but we had problems with airplanes. Not during the day. We had full air coverage during the day, but every night it's sundown. Their tactic was sundown and sunup. And our regular routine was an hour before sundown, you go to general quarters, you stay there to an hour after, and then an hour before sunup, and an hour after, so 2 hours every night and every morning you stayed at general quarters because that was the most logical time for air attacks. We took these troop convoys into Naples. The very first troop convoy we took in there, Naples had, we couldn't go ashore. Naples had a typhoid epidemic, and their sewer and water system was all disrupted and what have you. So our Commodore, we had a Commodore on board our ship. That's the captain's rate acting Commodore, which is a 1-star admiral. He arranged for us to go on the Isle of Capri. So we went on the Isle of Capri for this one particular day, and all we could do was get a horse and buggy and just ride around the island, but it was a beautiful island. And back on the ship, took us 3 days to go up, took them 4 days to unload the ships, troop ships, then it took us 3 days to get back into Oran, and we had to wait for them. It took them about 5 or 6 days to load these ships up again. Now, when we were sitting in Oran, or Mir el-Kabir, they always had something for these destroyers to do. They were out on patrol. When these convoys from the Atlantic would come in from the United States, when they were arriving at Gibraltar, they were met with our destroyers to give them extra escorts because they needed more escorts when they went through this area. So these destroyers, when you were sitting in there, some of them were on standby duty. Standby means that your ship's boilers were reduced in steam to a level where it would take you maybe 15 minutes or a half hour or maybe it'd be an hour when you could get up full steam so that you could get out of there. And any ship that was on standby duty, you couldn't have liberty because you couldn't get the people back from town soon enough. So Commodore Clay took an old building on the Navy base and we fixed it up, painted it, what have you, and we called it the Destroyers Club. Now, we were all given an allotment of beer, but you couldn't drink beer on the ship. So what you do is you get your 4 or 5 cans of beer, you take it over there, warm beer from the ship. They would give you cold beer, and then you would drink it over there. And it served 2 purposes. During the Second World War, there was no communication. We could not write that we were in the Mediterranean. They knew what ship we were on, but you had no information of what's going on around you. Well, these other destroyers, we'd all get in there and start talking, and one would say, well, we were out here, and this ship got sunk, or we had an air attack. That's how you got your information. It was called scuttlebutt. And you got all this here scuttlebutt information at this destroyer club. Of course, there was a few arguments in there, too, you know. I found out first thing, don't say you're from the Plunkett, because being in the Plunkett with a Commodore on board and you're in a group, the Commodore would always say, you go, you go. We didn't go, see. Like if they had a submarine attack someplace and he would send them out, he would always send everybody else. Well, it wasn't us, but they thought it was us doing it, see. So you learn fast, keep your mouth shut, don't tell people that you're from the Plunkett because you might end up on the deck, see. But anyway, we made these trips back and forth. One time we were in Naples. As I said, we had these here different duties. I was gig duty. Gig duty happens to be the whaleboat with a canopy over it where the captain rides in it. And he doesn't get wet, but everybody else does, see? The spray coming over the back. And I was what they call the bow hook man. When you come up alongside of the ship, you had a pole with a hook on it, and you pull yourself into the boat or a dock to hold it there while the officers get off and on. And we're on our way to take the Commodore Clay to another ship, which means when he went to see somebody, it had to be of equal or higher rank, say. And in came 3 PT boats. And they swung around our stern and come up our side a mile a minute. And our coxswain, who stands on the back with this tilter, he turned and went into the waves. Otherwise, it would have capsized us. And we hit this and boom, bitty, boom, boom, going over these waves. Commodore Clay sticks his head out. What's going on out here? And he saw we were soaking wet. And the coxswain just said, those 3 PT boats just cut us off. He says, forget where we're going, follow them. So we went in, they went in back of the breakwater where they tied up and pulled up to the dock, and he got out and a couple of his officers got out. And he went down there and said, who's in charge now? And this one young lieutenant says, I am. Well, he gave him a tongue lash, and I tell you, I never heard some words. I was only 17 years old. You know, I didn't hear words like this that he gave. And then there's another officer behind him writing down names, you know, because they all had their name right there, name tag, you know, they're writing down names. So I don't know whatever happened to him, but anyway, we got back in the gig, and we took him to where he went. And usually when you take the Commodore, you stay. I don't care if it's an hour or 5 hours or whatever it is, you stay right there in the boat waiting for him. Well, he said to the coxswain, he says, you go back to the ship, and you tell them to put another crew on this boat and tell them to give you a hot shower and change your clothes. He says, you're done for the day. So we dropped him off, went back, but I never heard what he did to the other officers. Anyway, in January of 1944, we made the invasion of Anzio. It was more like a milk run. We went up there with a convoy and we were bombarding, and we had slight air attacks during the day, but there were nothing that you would call major air attacks. They were mostly driven off. The third night, there was a convoy of troops in LSTs and LCIs coming up the coast, and we and some of the other destroyers went out to meet them and bring them into the landing area. And this is at sundown, and here comes the Germans. And this time they changed their tactics a little bit. They used to just 10 planes come over, they'd pick 10 targets. Now they concentrated on 1 or 2 targets. Now, as you saw, our ship had 4 guns, but it had 1 radar director up the top. And wherever that director pointed, those 4 guns fired, which means you only could fire at 1 target at one time. Now, the machine guns, which were 20 millimeter, and we had a 1.1 gun on there. 1.1 gun is 4 guns in a row, and it worked like a pom-pom type of thing. But they weren't as effective as the 5-inch. Well, we had a couple torpedoes miss us from torpedo planes. We had a couple glider bombs. The Germans had a glider bomb, which was a radio control bomb. They'd drop it from way up high and direct it by radio. And the only way you could defense it would be to jam a lot of the frequencies, hoping you hit the right one. They fell close by, and then all of a sudden, right midship, we were hit with a 500-pound bomb. As I say, we had this 1.1 gun there, and they claim it hit right at that point. Now, right underneath that 1.1 gun, when you have 4 guns firing, you need a lot of ammunition. So they had stored ammunition up there, plus they had the room right underneath of it full of ammunition. So you had a bang, bang. Took out the engine room, the after engine room, and I was in number 3 gun in the handling room. Now, under these guns, you have a handling room where you have a conveyor comes up from the magazine, and then part of the gun turret comes down, and there's a guy stands in there. His head is up into the turret of the gun, and you pass him the powder, and he passes it up to the men to put it into the gun. The shells, there was a hoist, it went up and down. You put the shell in upside down, and the guy up there, when he needed a shell, he hit the button, and it would zoop up, the other would come down, he just this way. We filled those hoists with shells. Well, this is right next to the washroom, the head area. Well, the blast came down, just disintegrated the head area. I mean, good thing nobody was sitting in there, because there was just nothing in that. And in our area, there might have been about 8 men in our area. Were just blown up against, some were up against the bulkhead, and I went through a door. Now, what had happened about 5 minutes before, we had a jam in this hoist that went up and down. The gun captain up there came down, did something, and got it working again. When he went out, he didn't dog the hatch. The hatch was left undogged, and the door swung out. And this fellow, Benner, lived up in Reading. He hit it first, and I'm on top of him, and we went out, and then we went in. There's like a little vestibule area, but nothing's open. It's just like cluttered with stuff, and went into that area. In the incident, we lost 53 men. We had 25 killed and 28 missing in there. In that area, we have a damage control party that just stands around waiting for something to happen. Well, they were wiped out. You have the torpedo men who take care of all the depth charges. There's three K guns on the starboard, 3 in the port. So there's 6 people right there that were huddled because we weren't using depth charges, so they were in away from the blast of these guns. You had the 1.1 people, and we had the secondary ship's pharmacy, or the hospital there. Our chief pharmacist, Chief Putis, he was there. And then the engine room, when it went down, it just said boilers broke, and you have 600 pounds of superheated steam. It just, the steam wiped out down there. We had a total of 53, and we had about 100 people wounded. And even as far away as the guy on the bridge that was hit with a piece of shrapnel that flew up there. The ship caught on fire, and now our pumping system, our fire mains are all busted because, first of all, the after engine room, and it ruptured all the mains, so the forward engine room couldn't even provide water down there. But the Navy always had these handy billies. That's just a gasoline pump. They had them lined up on the starboard, lined up on the port, hose laid out. Everything was always laid out for an emergency. So they got and you throw a suction line over the side. They got the handy billies going. People fought it from the forward part and the after part, and it took about an hour to get the fire out. And then we proceeded back into Palermo, Sicily. The problem was, this thing we said we were 38 feet. Well, at this point, we were only maybe about 35 feet wide. On the port side, we only had about 2 feet of deck left, so you couldn't get up and down the port side. On the starboard side, you had maybe about 6 feet, but there was so much wreckage there. It took them a couple hours before they could get the wreckage cleaned out, that you could get a passageway up. And this is nighttime now, you're trying to work your way up. And another thing, the disadvantage was this lifeline that went up and down, had posts every so often with cables run, was disintegrated. I mean, just blown off. So when you walked up there at nighttime and the ship's rolling and pitching, and you're holding on to some stuff, they did put a line down there, but hope you didn't get washed overboard. Some of the serious wounded we couldn't take up until the morning because they couldn't get a stretcher up and down on the thing. Anyway, we ended up back in Palermo, Sicily. They did some repair. They had to fill this hole in because our water was going right in from the deck. It was the same as that quarterdeck level, 5 feet off the water. And as the ship rolled, the water came over and went right down into the engine room, filling it up with water. So they had to rig portable pumps to pump that out. So in Palermo, they fixed that up. They put us in dry dock to make sure that our seams weren't broken. And they took the propeller off on the port side because the engine room was gone and it was a drag on the ship. And they mounted it on the stern of our ship. We lost all the depth charges on the port and the starboard. On the fantail, the racks were disintegrated from the explosion. Number 3 and 4 guns were leaning over from the explosion. So they got us in a ready condition, and they said, we're going out for a trial run. Well, I was standing wheel, I was just a seaman at this, and I stood wheel watches. And I remember this here Navy captain who was like an engineer, naval engineer. He came on board and he says, we're going out for this trial run. So we took the ship out. Now, we could still get up to 25 knots with one propeller, but the thing is you had to keep the wheel 10, 12 degrees to the right, so it's like driving your car down a road like this, see, to go straight, because that propeller wants to push you this way. When you're running with 2, it keeps you in a straight line. So it took a little knack to get the thing going straight, and we got it up to about 25 knots, and they had ordered everybody that didn't have to be below deck, get above deck and get a life jacket on. So you wonder what's going to happen here, see? Well, they threw it in reverse, full reverse. And that ship just shuddered like this, and finally it stopped. And then they stopped the engines, the engine, and then they started going forward again, and they had people with phones up to the bridge, and they were checking all the points. They wanted to see if the ship was going to break in two, because, you know, we had a 3,000-mile trip to get back to the States. Well, all the reports come in good, and the captain, this here Navy captain, said to our captain, it's okay to go. So, in the meantime, another ship, one of the destroyers, was up at Anzio, and let me turn this on for a minute here. A shell came over and hit their mast right about there, came through the cabin and lodged down in, there's an area between this gun and the deck, the housing right there, and lodged right in there. One of the chiefs ran up, it was an 8-inch shell, got the shell, threw it overboard. It hit the captain's leg, it broke the captain's leg, and said it mangled it up pretty bad. But he was standing right in there at that time. So they lost their radar, their radio. They had no communication except what they have called shortwave, TBS. It's talk between ships. It's only good for about a mile or so. So they came back to the States. We were their eyes and ears. Now, we had no 2 after guns. We had no depth charges that we could use at all. So we did have sonar, and we did have radar, and we did have radio. And we had limited maneuverability. So the two of us came back to the States. We were the eyes and ears, and they were our protection. And we made it into New York. And when we come into New York, these fuel tanks, you have to maintain ballast on your ship. And ballast, by when you take oil out of the tank, you put salt water in the tanks to keep the ship on an even keel. Now, when you're coming into port and going to have major overhaul or get refuel, you pump out that salt water. Of course, you lose a little oil with it too, but you don't. You just pump it out because the water stays in the bottom, the oil floats up to the top on it. We had a problem pumping it out because our after engine room now and the mains were ruptured that they couldn't get an even balance. So we came in with a 10-degree starboard list, which made our ship look twice as bad as what it was, because that had nothing to do with being hit. It was just a malfunction of the pumping system. When we got into New York, we pulled into this dock. We had to have tugs now, because normally we can come in and out without tugs, because with the 2 propellers you can maneuver your boat. Here we had no maneuverability, so they brought us in with tugs, put us in there. Excuse me. Already sitting on the dock, the after smokestack up there, right there, was so full of holes, looked like you shot it with 10 shotguns, you know. So they had a new smokestack. All this housing back here, the 2 rear guns, everything was sitting on the railroad cars right there on this here dockside, ready to go on. I went home on leave for 14 days. I come back. They already had the parts down in the engine, a new engine room installed, new boilers installed down in there. And they were getting ready to put the superstructure over top of it and miscellaneous things. We were supposed to be there for 3 months. We were there for about 2 months at the most getting this job. They worked day and night. Now, when you go into port like that, they cut off all the electricity and your heat and everything. The ship is shut down 100%. So they didn't bring heat on, but they did bring electricity on. We had no washrooms at this point. Matter of fact, we didn't have any washrooms all the way back. We used the officers and the chief's washrooms all the way back because there was just nothing available for the men to use. You try to sleep on a ship. I said a tin can with noise rattling around. These workers work 24 hours a day with chipping hammers, and you hear a chipping hammer up on the forecastle go rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. You couldn't sleep nowhere. On the dock, they had restrooms. They were big cinder block buildings, and there was a lot of room in the center. So somebody got the idea, take your not your sleeping bag, but your mattress, and go over and lay down on the floor in the restroom. And at least it was heated, and you didn't have that noise of the ship, what was on the ship. Anyway, they got us fixed up, and we went out for a lot of trial runs. And on about May 1st, we thought we were just going out for another trial run, and we start going north in the Atlantic, and we start picking up additional ships, and we ended up with a group. There was 3 battleships, 3 heavy cruisers, and 1 oiler, and 32 destroyers, which to the Pacific might not be a big group, but when you got in the Atlantic, a group of that size, you know there's something going on that's just not ordinary. Now, the battleship Texas, Arkansas, and Nevada were there. The cruisers Quincy, Tuscaloosa, and the Augusta. What people didn't know was the Augusta was Roosevelt's personal ship. There was no way no planes could fly across the Atlantic back in those days. And when he went any place, he went on the Augusta. Augusta was the only Navy ship that I know of that had an elevator put on there just for his use, so that he could go up and down and what have you. When we got, and this oiler was because these destroyers, we were traveling about 20 knots. You have to refuel about every 4 or 5 days. Now you got 32 destroyers, so it's like a pumping station, man. You got to keep that line going, you know, to get in there, get your fuel, and get away. And about 2 days before we were due to arrive, the Quincy, which had the Admiral on board, decided they wanted to get into port. We were going to Belfast at this time, see, Belfast, Ireland. They wanted to get into Belfast early, so they dispatched the Plunkett and another destroyer to escort them in. And I happened to be on the sound gear at this time, and Jerome, which was see, I was a striker. That's called an apprentice. They call it a striker, but it's really an apprentice. And Jerome, who was the first class, was teaching me on the sound gear. I said, I can't hear anything, Jerome. We called everybody by the last name in the Navy. Nobody ever knew their first name. You know, it was either hey Mac or hey your last name. And I said, hey Jerome, I can't hear anything. And he knew right away what it was. He opened the door to the bridge and says, what's happening out here? And the officer says, oh, we forgot to tell you, raise the sound gear. Because it's in, once you go over 20 knots, it's just no good. So I pressed the button to raise the sound gear. Now, this was brand new sound gear put on just a month before. The latest thing, developed right here in Princeton, New Jersey, Princeton University. You raise the sound gear with the button, but at the last foot, you have to go down into the bilges and hand crank it up. For what reason, I don't know. Jerome took off and went down to the chief's quarters, opened the round hatch in the floor, and just as he's ready to climb down, straight down this ladder, boom, we hit something. And water started coming in that compartment. So he just closed the hatch, dogged it down again, and called the bridge and said, there's water coming in. What happened was we hit a fish, some type of a large fish. Now this sonar dome was similar to an egg shape. It was more pointy in the front. It was about 2 feet wide and about 4 foot long. That was the stainless steel protector. Inside was your equipment that would revolve around so that the sound would go out. Somehow we hit a fish and put a hole in that there stainless steel thing. Now it had to be a pretty good sized fish, but at this time we didn't know what it was. Anyway, when you're talking to an admiral on the Quincy, they don't want to hear anything about this. You're our escort, you better just keep up with it. So we continued on in, and Belfast is similar to Philadelphia. You have the Irish Sea here, and Belfast is way up like Philadelphia is. The only difference is Belfast had a huge harbor that was a deep water harbor. When this fleet came in, there was still plenty of room for more ships. Now you're talking about, and there were a lot of ships there to start with. So when you talk about, like the Delaware, you only have channels in it. You don't have any depth for these ships to anchor in. All these ships had to anchor out into this here bay. Now to get to port or into the town, you had to take motor launch, see? And that took time to go up the bay and up the river into the Belfast city. Well, the second day they put us into dry dock. And that's when we found out. They found flesh and fish bones. Now, it wasn't a whale because whale doesn't have small bones, see? So it was some type of shark or what. They have no idea what it was. Nobody had equipment there. This is the latest stuff found. So they had to send equipment over from the United States, and they also had to send some men over that knew how to put it in because nobody there knew anything about this equipment, and our men on our ship were not technicians, they were all operators. So we were in there for a good 2 weeks. We got that thing fixed. In the meantime, all these other destroyers are out doing exercises, practice landings, target practice, and whatever. They were working their butt off. And we're in there enjoying the liberty of Belfast. And finally they get us fixed up. And about 2 days before the invasion, John Ford came on our ship. Now, John Ford is a Hollywood director. He was Roosevelt's personal friend. And he was in charge of all Allied naval photography for the invasion, which meant, and the book that's out about him says he had 500 cameras placed in different landing craft, ships, whatever. He even had 2 men that went into the beach with the frogmen, and the pictures you're seeing of soldiers coming in were taken by his 2 cameramen that they were in German pictures. They were American pictures taken of the soldiers landing, getting off the landing craft and what have you. And somebody asked him, why did he pick our ship? Well, he wanted to be in the center of the location. Now, we were at Point de Hoc, which is where the Rangers were up. You had the Omaha and you had Nevada Beach, so you were right in the center of all the landing areas. And you knew the destroyers were going to be in pretty close. Now, we were in what they call Group O for the invasion. Oh, when we left Belfast, they also put buoys on our stern. You know, we had like all red buoys, another ship had yellow buoys or whatever. And we wondered, what are these buoys? And they had an anchor, I mean a heavy weight, and a cable on them. And they figured, well, we're going to mark something. So we start out of Belfast, and we get down the Irish Sea, and we're down, this is the sea between England and Ireland, and partway down, they delayed it 24 hours. So now what do you do with the fleet coming down? Well, we turned around 180 degrees and went north for 12 hours, turned around 180 degrees, 12 hours, we were exactly where we were the day before, but 24 hours later. So we continued on over and went into the invasion. Now we were fire support, we were support of the battleship Texas. The minesweepers went in and we were laying mines on the starboard side. Another ship was way over there on the port side laying areas where the minesweepers had swept channels. Now, as these mines, a minesweeper just puts out a cable with a paravane, and that paravane is down maybe, 8, 10 feet in the water, and it just cuts the cable, and that mine pops right up. So, as they pop up, our job was to come back after we laid them and shoot. The only way to sink them is shoot them, Shoot them with 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter guns. Sink the mines to clear the area for the battleships and the cruisers to come in and start the bombardment. Now, the Texas, for the first this is like 4 or 5 in the morning we're doing this. It was up till maybe 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. The Army wasn't making much headway. They needed some fire support in there. They couldn't get any tanks in. The sea was still rough. So they moved all the destroyers in to within 500 yards of the beach. And they said, just going to stay there. We're not leaving. This invasion is not going to be canceled. And there was one commentator at the 50th anniversary who said if it hadn't been for the Allied destroyers moving in, the invasion would have failed. Because they went in and became the tanks for the Army and just blasted the heck out of machine gun, whatever was around. Some was visual and some was by, spotters. It wasn't until about noontime when things broke a little bit. We still stayed there and fired, but that night they put us out to, from the area of Cherbourg Peninsula over to the northern area. It was about 70 miles of open sea, and they had to protect us from E-boats. They weren't afraid of submarines as much because they didn't have the depth and the maneuverability for submarines in there, but these E-boats would come up along the coast or down from the northern part. and they play havoc with the ships. Well, the first night we're out there, and one ship picked up a target, and it went out. Well, what happened was the Germans had about 4 or 5 of these E-boats tied together, or tied one after another, and in the radar it just shows like one blip, but it was more than one. And as they approached it, they all broke. And as I said, you got 4 guns, but you only can shoot at one target. Well, this guy was in trouble out there. And what they found out was the only defense you had was you just started shooting your guns manually around, and we had shells that could break it 500 yards, 1,000 yards, whatever distance you want to set them. You start putting blast all the way around, and it turned them away because they weren't afraid of getting hit, but you know, shrapnel can do a lot of damage to a wooden boat. So the next night we're out there, every time they got a target, they would send 3 destroyers out there. And so you have a little more protection. But they basically did the same thing too, just put a lot of shells around the area. The second night we were out there on this patrol, we picked up a target at quite a distance, but it was coming from England. And we tracked it and tracked it and tracked it. Now you have to understand, the day started around, it was daylight at 5 in the morning, and it was still daylight at 10 at night. It started between 10 and 11. So that's why they call this the longest day. It was the longest day of daylight in the year calendar. And so it got to be maybe about midnight, we were ordered to go out and challenge this ship. Now they had a signal recognition. It used to change every 6 hours. You would flash a code to them, and they were supposed to return a certain code back. If they didn't, you just opened fire. Well, this ship didn't answer the challenge, so we opened fire. First thing they did was they fired a star shell up. And that's just a shell that bursts and has a parachute and illuminates the area. Well, whoever directed it didn't get enough elevation, so when it bursted, it just fell down. It didn't get enough elevation, and it didn't really do anything. So we fired 96 rounds at this ship. We hit it 4 times. Now that wasn't very good shooting, I'll tell you that. We hit the bow, the bridge, the stern, and the barge. This was a cable ship laying cable across, communication cable across the English Channel. The logistics in this invasion was something, Army had, or Eisenhower had an oil line being laid across for diesel fuel. He had a gasoline line laid across, and he had 2 communication lines being laid across. He knew it was going to be a while before they get to port, and they couldn't always they had to bring everything on a landing craft, and it wasn't easy to bring stuff in a landing craft. You need docks to bring equipment and supplies in. Well, we sunk the barge. There went his. Well, the next morning, we went alongside the Quincy, and our captain went over there, and he came back with his tail behind his legs. I mean, he was livid, because he got a chewing out from this admiral, because this was just more than sinking a barge. And the Plunkett has now the distinction of sinking 2 British ships. Before I went on in the Mediterranean, the Newfoundland, which is a British hospital ship, at Salerno was hit by a German bomb. Our ship and another ship put men on board, and they worked for 36 hours trying to put the fire out. Now, fortunately, the ship was going in for wounded, not coming out with wounded. I don't know how many people were on the ship that killed or injured, but they couldn't put the fire out. After 36 hours, the orders were sink it. So our ship went and fired a couple shells along the waterline and sunk it. So now they say, we sunk the hospital ship, now we just sunk a cable ship, you know. Well, you don't see us painting it on the bridge. We paint planes up there, but we don't put British ships up there. The other thing was, at this time, I was on the boarding party. We have a fire rescue and boarding party, and when they found out, as soon as we started firing, this British ship then brought the right challenge back, so we ceased firing, and they asked for medical help. So our doctor, we got in this here, the gig, and the doctor and a pharmacist and some other people, and I happened to be one of them there, and we're going over to this ship, and the doctor is saying, Now, for God's sakes, don't anybody say we were the ones firing. Keep your mouth shut, because you're going to be hung right from that yardarm up there if they find out you're the one. Well, they were asking us, you know, who was firing at us? Because they figured there was no Germans out there. It had to be one of the Allied ships. But nobody answered a thing. We didn't say a thing on the thing. So, about the third night or fourth night, we had to take the Quincy over to England to get ammunition and, of course, refuel. And we got ammunition and we refueled. Now, when you tie up at a dock, we always put a sentry on the forecastle and a sentry on the fantail. They have a rifle. And you have a guy on the gangway where you come on. He has a pistol. Well, you go in there, we tie up, and they put 2 men on the forecastle and 2 men on the stern. One has a rifle and one has an axe. And you say, now what the hell's the axe for? Well, this tide is 18 feet it drops. That's 3 feet an hour that tide starts dropping. And if you don't slack those lines off, your ship is going to be hanging up there, or you're going to pull the dock right off, because it's going to get so tight that you cannot undo the lines. So the axe is for, if you fall asleep, you cut the lines and you put new lines on there. Well, and this was the thing with D-Day, 18 foot. When that tide started going out of there, we were in at one point. This is the only time we ever had a guy on the pedometer. That's the depth measuring gauge. Full time. He had to keep those readings, because as that tide was dropping 3 feet an hour and going out, our ship had to move out. We might have ended up started at 500 yards. We might have been 1,000 yards by the time, you know, we were an hour, a couple hours later, because it was a terrible drop of tide over there. Well, anyway, we stayed there until the June 24th was Cherbourg. Cherbourg was a big French port on the Atlantic coast, and they needed this deep water port to get these supplies in and out by dock. And the Army was closing in on Cherbourg. So here again, this here group, and we happened to be with the Texas, and we started coming in, and it was about noontime when this operation started. And they let us come in, and as soon as the Texas fired a couple shells. Now, we're about 5 miles out. You know, our shells wouldn't do much damage because we'd have to be in a little closer when it was 5 inches, but they had 14-inch guns. And all of a sudden, they left go with these here. They were firing 8-inch shells at us. Well, in a series of firing, one of the shells hit the Texas on the superstructure right below the bridge. And we were ordered with another destroyer to lay smoke around this Texas. Now, smoke is, we had a generator on the fantail that would create white smoke, but white smoke rose pretty fast because there's always seems a breeze out there. So you would blow your stacks, and the black smoke from your smokestacks would go down and lay on the white and would hold it down. And now they're firing at the Texas. They're not firing at us. We're going around this Texas, you know, we and the other destroyer are going around this in circles, and the Texas is getting out of there to assess the damage. Now, how we never got hit, I don't know, because it's like you standing there and somebody throwing snowballs at you and somebody else running around you, you got to hit them sometime, but we didn't get hit. We went out, they assessed the damage, back in we came, another blast to let us come in. We did this all afternoon. At night we went out at sea, and then the next day we come in early in the morning and the same thing. Now, what they were firing at, not so much at the artillery that were firing at us, but the Army had spotters there, and the Germans had a tank division in there, and we were firing, or these ships were firing at these tank divisions, and their gun emplacements that were firing at the Army. And the thing is, they had to be very careful because they didn't want to overshoot, because then it would be into the U.S. Army's area. So the final analysis was that the Navy did a pretty good job of knocking the Army, the German Army, back a few steps and helping the American Army take over Cherbourg. From Cherbourg, we went up to Belfast. The fleet went up to Belfast. From Belfast, we were going back to the Mediterranean. Of course, nobody ever told us anything, because You know, we didn't have enough stars on our shoulder here. Now I have a note here, shoes half soled. Well, you wonder what shoes half soled got to do with the war. Well, in Belfast, you know, the Navy on this destroyer, you had no shoemaker. Big ship, you might have one. You just threw your shoes away. And the shoes, you know, the soles wear out on the water and what have you. Somebody found this there shoemaker, was anxious for business, and he guaranteed us he'd have the shoes back at a certain time because we knew we were leaving pretty soon. So we took, it was either 50 or 75 pair of shoes over there, and he sold them, and they were beautiful. What we didn't know was leather was ration. We didn't have leather, that was pressed paper, glued together. Well, that's all right in land, but then on salt water, well, it wasn't more than a couple of days, we pulled out, and we're in the Atlantic, and our shoes started coming apart and glued. Well, what are you going to do? If we could get back there, we'd hang them, but we couldn't get back there, so you throw the shoes away. See, we went up north with this convoy, went towards Iceland, went out of the Atlantic, down, and we stayed far enough out of the French coast that the German airplanes couldn't get to us, and we went through the Straits of Gibraltar at nighttime. And believe it or not, we had an air raid. The first night, the night we were going through there. They knew exactly where we were. But with all the firepower they had out there, the submarines, I guess, didn't want to tackle us. But the Air Corps did. And we had this here, they didn't sink any of our ships, but then there was a lot of fighting going on that night. Our ship went into Oran. Some of the ships went on to Algiers, Palermo, Sicily, Naples. They scattered all over. We ended up all in Naples. And on August 15th, well, 2 days before that, we left, but August 15th was the invasion of southern France. And southern France was like a pushover compared to the Normandy. They just went right in. We did some bombarding. The army went right in. The second night, we were ordered to go to Ajaccio, Corsica, to pick up a VPI. Well, the VPI was Secretary of the Navy Forrestal. Frank Knox had been the Secretary of the Navy for years with Roosevelt. And he died in the spring, and James Forrestal was Undersecretary, and he was appointed Secretary, and he had flown over. At this time now, they had planes that could fly across, so he came over and he toured the Normandy invasion, and he flew down, and he flew into Ajaccio, Corsica, and we went there with I want to put this on here. And we picked up, this is General Somerville right there, and that's our executive officer. They sent us down with 2 PT boats, because Ajaccio, Corsica is not that far away from the mainland of southern France, and the E-boats were our biggest problem. We weren't so much afraid of submarines at that point. But we went down there and we picked up the 2 of them, brought them back to the southern France area, the Quincy being the flagship, and they had a conference on there for about 2 days. I guess he went ashore and visited, whatever. Then we picked them up again and took them back to Ajaccio, Corsica. So there was 2 VPIs we had on our ship. Turn it off. The southern France also needed some harbors and ports to land ships. So Toulon being the first one, we went in at Saint-Tropez. Some people say Saint-Tropez, Saint-Tropez, but it's the Riviera of the French Riviera there. We went in that area there with our invasion. Toulon was west of that, and the army was coming in again from the land, and we went in there as fire support. You know, at this time, we had some French ships with us. We were assigned to the Lorraine, which is a French battleship, the old World War I battleship. And the Quincy and the Texas and all were there. And there again, the Germans would let us come in. And then as soon as we got into well in their range, they would start firing. And then they had all that distance to fire as we traveled out to get out of the place. And we laid smoke screens for the Lorraine, and other ships were laying them for the Texas and other things. This went on for about 3 or 4 days. Finally, the Army took the port. We moved down to Marseille, which is further west towards Spain. Same thing happened down there, only not as bad down there. We bombarded down there for a couple of days. The Army took that. When they got into Toulon, they found out Toulon is a big harbor, and there's a peninsula comes out with a small opening that lets the ships go in and out. And on that one point was a mound, and the French had one of the largest battleships in the world that was scuttled in there. It was still sitting above water. The decks, some of the decks were still above water, but it had, on the forward turret, had 18-inch guns. Now, the biggest gun we ever had was 16-inch on them. The Germans had taken that turret off and took it out there on this there knoll out there and built a concrete bunker, and they had that there, and that's what they were firing at with these 18-inch shells. You talk 18-inch shells, a pretty big size shell firing at us. Fortunately, they didn't hit any of us, but that's what was screaming out there at us. Well, we took the Army took the two ports. Now, the Army was moving down the coast of southern France towards the Alps, and it was rough terrain. They couldn't get tanks down there, and they couldn't get heavy artillery. So they had 3 destroyers would go out there for 3 days. We'd be 3 days out, 3 days back, 3 days out. We were fire support. All day long we would fire. The Army had spotters, and we would be firing at either gun locations, troop locations, whatever they had in there. But we did this up till just before Christmas, and then they sent us back to Oran, and we stayed in Oran for Christmas, and we took a convoy from Oran back to the United States. We had 100 LSTs. Now the Army figured, the Navy figured there was no more landings over there, so they were going to bring these back, refit them, and send them to the Pacific. Well, we started out in the Atlantic with these LSTs, and some of them started breaking down because they were worn out. And some of the other LSTs started towing them. They sent some tugs out to tow them. Even a couple of destroyers ended up towing some of them. We finally got them back. We dropped some off at Gitmo, which is Guantanamo Bay. That's what they call it, Gitmo. Some off in Florida, some in Charleston, some in Norfolk. And then we left them and we went up to Bayonne to get refitted. They always have to be refitted. These ships, were run continuously, and the boilers had to be either rebuilt, or after so many rounds of ammunition, you had to reline the barrels. What they do is they just take the barrel out, put another barrel in, take it back to the factory and do something with it. So you get like a major overhaul. From there, we went out on submarine patrol, because the subs were right off the Atlantic at this time. And we had like little killer groups, they called them. And you just go out there in groups and hunt submarines. Finally, we get a convoy to Liverpool, England. So we leave Boston, we're on our way to Liverpool, England. And about halfway across, the Germans surrendered. Well, we continued on into Liverpool. And Liverpool is the only harbor I ever saw that maintained one level. Now, I'm telling you, they have this 18-foot tide in that area. The harbor stayed one level because they have locks. And you come in, and the locks raise you up. Now, when we went in, the tide was in, and we didn't know it. We just sailed right in. Now we're going to get out, or at least, the captain might have known about it, but I didn't know about it. Come out, and you're up here, and there's nothing. It's just marsh, but there's a river. And you're going, how am I going to get to that river? Well, you go in this locks, a couple of locks, and they set you down. And out you go. And it works great for the harbor, but I can't understand how the Germans never bombed that thing, because that would have really disrupted things. But they never bombed, or the harbor area anyway, in Liverpool. That was the only time we were allowed to stay overnight off the ship. When we went on Liberty, we were sundown, sun up to sundown. You had to be back on the ship at sundown. There, they gave us a 3-day pass. Now, just north, 60 miles north of Liverpool, is a place called Southport. They just had a golf tournament over there recently. Beautiful resort. Of course, the Air Corps had taken the whole thing over as their R&R. Now, here's a bunch of sailors going up there, and there's no room. Well, we found out the people were willing to put you up in their rooms as bed and breakfast in return for money, because it was a good thing for us and a good thing for them. They were making money, and they'd sleep overnight and just give you breakfast, and you're on your own the rest of the day. We left Liverpool and come back to the States. They put us in Boston for a major overhaul. We had 10 torpedo tubes on this ship, 5 between the 2 stacks and 5 after the stacks. Never fired one of them at the enemy. They were just taking up road on the ship. So they took the torpedo tubes off and they put 40-millimeter guns. They put 3 on the starboard side, 3 down the port side. Remember I told you, like the main director, wherever that thing went, those 5-inch. The 40 millimeters were all manually. Wherever those 2 guys, that's the way it was. It was just all manual. Well, they had developed this here stand-up radar station. And this guy looked in the screen, and wherever he pointed that thing, he locked onto a plane, his gun would lock onto it. So they had 3 radar stations down on the starboard side and 3 down the port side, which made you could take care of 6 planes right there with 40-millimeter guns, electronically, not manually. Well, then, what we were called was a picket ship. Okinawa, they were knocking the picket ships off left and right. They were the early warning radar ships that were out in no man's land, and the kamikazes were hitting them. Fortunately, we never got there. We got there, we didn't get to the fighting over there. They sent us to Guantanamo Bay, and in Guantanamo Bay, they had these radio-controlled airplanes. They were about 5 or 6 foot wingspan, and they were controlling them for someplace, and they would fly them right at your ship. Not to hit your ship, like to go right over the top of your ship. It was to simulate a kamikaze coming at you, and you fire them, you're supposed to knock them out. See? So we were down there for about 2 weeks, gunnery practice, and we stayed out. When you were out there firing, you didn't come back in the port at nighttime. You stay out there, and you do about 4 or 5 nights. Well, this one night, this cook decided he wanted to catch a shark. So we had a grappling hook. The grappling hook is about a 4-prong hook. He took his big piece of beef, stuck it on there, had a chain on it, and we had a winch, a hand winch on the stern. And he threw this here beef over. Wasn't long, man, something hit that thing. Well, he had to have help to reel that thing in. And it was about a 10 or 12-foot shark. And they finally got it on board the ship, and they had the number 4 gun, it's the very last gun, they had it hanging from the barrel of the gun. Well, that was okay. To find out the next day, they cut it up. He put the jawbone in the kettle where you cook the food and was steaming it because he wanted that as a souvenir. Well, he almost got court-martialed for that, But another thing they had at Guantanamo, they had a beer called Hatui beer. It had an Indian picture of an Indian head on it. 14% alcohol. Now, our beer here is, 3 or 4%. They had, this is July, they had these here pavilions out there, just a roof over it, all open air. It's nice in there. Well, you're in there drinking a beer. Now you go out. As soon as you get out of the hot sun, they were keeling over left and right because nobody realized there was 14% and you had so much alcohol in you. But we went from there, we went through the Panama Canal. One day out of the Panama Canal, the war in Japan ended. We continued to Pearl Harbor. From Pearl, we went to Saipan. Saipan, we went up to Wakayama, Japan. We had a troop convoy. We went right into Wakayama, Japan. From Wakayama, we went down to the Philippines Island. We stayed there for a couple of days. We picked up another troop convoy, and this time we went up to Nagoya, Japan. Now, in Philippines, it's nice and warm. We were out there in the baseball field with our shirts off, drinking beer, playing baseball. We had no foul weather gear. Get up to Japan, there's 8 destroyers in our group. Go to the Aleutians. You've got to pick up, they need transportation of service people to get them back to the States for the holidays, So we go up there, and we didn't get any foul weather gear until we got Adak, Alaska, when we got our foul weather gear. Now, they put 150 men on our ship. Now, understand our ship had depleted in personnel because we lost people by points and what have you at this time, but we still had, you know, maybe a big complement. They put 150 people on there. They're supposed to have your bunk during the day. At nighttime, they got to get out of it and you take it over. Well, at this point, I had some seniority and I had a nice top bunk just at this level. And there's a size 12 boot with a GI in there looking me right in the face, and I'm supposed to tell him, you get out of my bunk. Well, I also smartened up a little bit. I figured I'll look for someplace else. Well, there was no other place. But we did have life preservers around, you know, so you threw a couple of life preservers on the deck and you sleep on them rather than argue with some big guy like that. It took us 3 days to get down to Seattle. We came back to the Aleutians. In the meantime, the Coast Guard had a ship out there, Coast Guard ship with aerologists on it. They predicted the weather for the West Coast from the Bering Sea. The ship broke down, so the ship was brought back into port, towed back into port. We're low people on the totem pole. You know, when you're in a group, the captain's number that he was commissioned with is his number that he is in line of seniority. So they put us on the weather patrol. For 21 days we're out there doing 5 knots, terrible seas, swells up and down, what have you. And finally they get the Coast Guard ship repaired, we come back in. In the meantime, these other destroyers are down, 3 days down, 3 days back, right? And when they were in the port, they didn't spend any time in Liberty. They just turned around and come right back again, unloaded the personnel. So they're making these trips. Well, we picked up, went to Adak, and then we come down into another port, and finally in Dutch Harbor, and we had about 150 passengers on. We come down. This time we went into San Francisco. In San Francisco, we unloaded the passengers, and we stayed there for about a week. Now, this is Christmas, and we stayed there for Christmas and New Year's. Right after New Year's, we left and went down through the Panama Canal. Now, as we hit the Panama Canal, we were supposed to go through, this 8 destroyers together again, we were supposed to go through the canal tomorrow. Well, the Wisconsin and the South Dakota were sitting there. There were 2 battleships. And somebody said they were sitting there for a week. All of a sudden, they decided they wanted to go through. Well, that guy had more stripes on his shoulder, you know, than our 8 destroyers did. So we got pushed back. They went through. We sat there for another week. Well, it was beautiful because it was beautiful weather. The Navy had a nice recreation area, swimming pool there, baseball fields and what have you. Now we start through the Panama Canal. They take 2 destroyers at a time through the locks. And that's seniority. So now we're the last with this other destroyer. The first 2 take off, and they're doing like 15 knots. Everybody had a rendezvous point of 100 miles out at sea. It takes 8 hours to go through there. Now, when they were through, we were just starting. So they're 8 hours ahead of us. And we get through the canal. Now, we had to go 25 knots to reach them. And the Caribbean can be rough, believe me. And that was the only time I ever got seasick, because I had all that calm weather coming from Frisco down and sitting in the canal zone there, and all of a sudden you hit this rough weather. Well, in a day or so, things calm down. Now, they're going to decommission us. The ships are worthless. They decide they're going to have a speed run to see if the ships are capable, you know. So the ship's supposed to do 35 knots. Well, we got up to 33 knots. About half of the destroyers started breaking down. In other words, the bearings started overheating, whatever, and we all ended up doing 15 knots back into Charleston, South Carolina. The speed run was just, matter of fact, it was supposed to be a 4-hour speed run, and only lasted a couple hours because there was just too many casualties in the thing. And we come into Charleston, South Carolina, and we start decommissioning the ship. And then that's when I got off and discharged. Now, I had gone in as a minority, on a minority cruise. That's, you can go in any time in your 17th year, but you get out the day you're 21. Now, my birthday is December 30th. So I got out March 4th. I still had, 9 months to go on my enlistment, but I had so many points that they were glad to get rid of us. You know, anybody wanted to go, they would break your enlistment date or your commitment. So I got out, And of course they asked, you want to sign up again? No, no. That was the end of that. So anyway, the ship was decommissioned down there. I got off March 4th. And that was my story of a 17, 18-year-old. Most of the things happened when I was 18 years old. See? Anybody have any questions they want?
I'd like to ask a question. Who in the audience here can generate this good a story about what you did when you were 18 years old?
Well, I learned more about the Navy since I've been out than I did when I was in. But I remember one thing when I was on the sonar gear that this senior petty officer told me. He says, just remember, because it was easy to fall asleep. You know, we never had to worry about anything in back of us. The submarine at that time underwater only could go about 6 or 7 knots underwater. And we were always doing 12 to 15 or better. So you'd ping from here up to the bow. Then you'd bring the machine down up this way. So you'd only worry about what's on your side, say, never what's in your rear. And this could ping, you know, and the new machine would go ping, turn 5 degrees, ping, turn 5, ping. When it got up to the bow, you had to press a button and bring it down over this way. It's easy to fall asleep. And he said to me, when you're sleeping down in that compartment, you're relying on that guy up there to stay awake because your life is in his hands. So you got to remember that when you're up here and he's sleeping down there, you know, his life is in your hands. I never forgot that because it's a part of responsibility, and it can't be taken. It couldn't be taken lightly on the thing. So, if I had a minute, I'd like to tell you about a part I didn't talk about: depth charge. The fiasco of a submarine attack. Now, I say I was a sonar man, and you're searching, and you get an echo, and the first thing you do is you notify the bridge, and then you verify the echo. By verifying means you would ping across, because at that point you kick it off the automatic, and you ping right across till you come off. And then you start pinging back, and where you started to hit the echo, you come across, and say at 2,000 yards, we had a chart. That should have been, they say, 10 degrees right there. If the thing was like 30, you know, well, 2,000 yards, that had to be a school of fish. So there's ways of verifying the thing, see. So you verify the thing. The bridge notifies the captain, and right away they change speed on the thing. Because the Germans used to have these acoustical torpedoes that they'd throw at you that would hone in on your sound of the propellers. Down each side you had 3 depth charge called K-guns. That's a gun that shoots out a depth charge. There's a piston, and on that was a rack, a depth charge. That depth charge weighed 300 pounds. There was 3 of them down the starboard, 3 down the port. On the fantail you had 2 roll-off racks. They were like barrels of oil. They weighed 600 pounds apiece. So when you have a depth charge attack, you drop 2, you fire 2. You go a little further, you drop 2, you fire 2. You go a little further and you drop 2 and you fire 2. Now, that's easy back there. What the problem was on these K-guns, you got to pick up a piston. The piston goes out with it, you know. There's a 3-inch shell, about 8 inches long, that goes into this here gun, and when they fire it, that shoots this piston out. You got to put a new piston in, and you got to lift this 300-pound depth charge up on this here cradle and put a chain or cable around the thing, see. So that's where the fire or the damage control people came in. They would be standing around where you had a torpedo man at every depth charge station, but he couldn't lift this, so you get the other people, you had to work as a teamwork. They would get it, pick these things up and put them in there, lock it in. Now, our equipment had no way of telling the depth of a submarine. We could tell the range, the course, the speed of a submarine, but we could not tell the depth with our equipment. The only way we could judge our depth was as we're making an approach onto that submarine. Our sonar went out at a certain angle like this. When we got to a point where we lost him. That means he's in on us. At that range level, we could tell his depth. Say at 1,000 yards, we lost him. Well, that means he's pretty deep. See, if you got him up to 500 yards, that means he's pretty shallow, you know, the submarine. So all these depth charges are set on safety. When you have an attack, each torpedo-man checks each one of those he has to take off safety. Now, there's also a setting for the depth on there. He's waiting. There's one guy on the starboard, one guy on the port connected to the bridge. And when the bridge says, set him for 50 feet or set him for 100 feet, he has to reach in, like on those roll-off racks, he has to reach in that metal rack in there and turn that dial, see, to that 100 feet. Now, at the last minute, they might say, set it for 150. Well, he's got to get it in there. Now, he's also got to get his hand out of the road because a couple of people have got their hand caught in there. And, you know, when it's a barrel the size of a 50-gallon oil drum weighing 600 pounds starts rolling, you know, the hand isn't going to stop him. Just take the hand right off. The problem was at nighttime. See, daytime wasn't the problem. Nighttime, they had a little flashlight. And you're over there and you're looking, and if a guy's nervous and he can't get that thing set. Now, when those K-guns, when that thing blasts out, you got to be away because there is a splatter of, you know, of the powder that goes around it. So, guy's up there and he's trying to set that thing. So it was a hectic and trying times. Each time they had a submarine tech, especially at nighttime, you know, to set these things, get them fired, reload them, get them fired, what have you. The firing was basically all done from the bridge. Now, a guy on the bridge can't see if a guy on the fantail has his hand in the road. He presses the button or something that releases those depth charges to come down. He can't tell. You know, he's just hoping that everybody's out of the road and safely out of the road there so they don't get hurt on the thing. Another thing is when you're in the ship, in the back part of the ship, the screws and the propellers, they go room, 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 they put you to sleep. Usually, as soon as they change speed, you never change the speed unless you're going to do something, go someplace, or you got some type of an attack. Everybody jumps out of their beds. You don't have to sound general quarters. Just everybody jumps out of their bed. And usually when you're at sea, we sleep with our clothes on, our shoes on, because you don't have time to get yourself dressed. And you take off, get topside. So by the time general quarters is sound, you know, there's a thing goes gong, gong. I mean, it's a creepy sound. It'll get you up. And you get topside and start going to your station. Now, you have guys that are going at general quarters from forward to aft and aft to forward. Like, I'm on the sonar gear. When you go to general quarters, we had 9 men in the group, 3 watches. Your 3 senior men are on the sonar gear for general quarters. The rest of us are scattered, excuse me, scattered around the ship at different points. So you might have, and you can't leave your station until you get relieved. So the guy comes up there to relieve you, and then you have to race. Like I was in number 3 gun, I had to race to the back of the ship to get into the number 3 handling room. Depending on wherever you are, you're back and forth. So sometimes it's like mad confusion, but it works like on a teamwork, and it takes a lot of practice, which they did give us a lot of practice. Only one time, we really never sunk that I know of, sunk a submarine. We dumped a lot of depth charges, and nothing ever came up, as far as I know. But when I said, well, we took these convoys out of Oran, Africa, the destroyers would go out into that sea 6 hours ahead of time, and we would patrol back and forth constantly to clear the area out. And then the troop ships about noontime would start coming out one by one, form the convoy. Well, this one time, one of the destroyers picked up a contact, and of course, when you get a contact, now they send 3 destroyers in, so that not only the first guy is throwing, you have a guy over here, so you've really got a spread pattern. And the German submarine surfaced. Now, we could see it. We weren't in on the action, but we could see it. They made the mistake of going for their surface gun. And So while these destroyers are there, they're at general quarters, so all their guns are manned and ready and aimed at the submarine. Well, as soon as they went for their service gun, they let go on it, and after a couple hits on the conning tower, they threw up the white flag, and it sunk. They didn't capture the submarine, but it sunk. That was the only close encounter we had that visually we saw. We had a lot of them we didn't see, but that's the only one we saw. As I said, the Germans only had one area to search for ships in there, and that was along the North African coast. They didn't have to search the rest of the Mediterranean because that was the only way convoys went up and down. So we had 6 destroyers sunk in that Mediterranean, some for aircraft, but mostly from submarine. And even though a destroyer has all the equipment on it to prevent it, you can still get hit. But, all right, that's all I have to say.
Before we finish, I've got some paperwork here. I believe I've counted 65 people tonight, and they would like to know how many are preschool age 1 to 5. I don't think I saw any. Well, sometimes there are. Elementary school 6 to 13. 1, and high 2. I see 2. Okay. High school age 1, 2. That's all? 2 and 2. Okay. Well, we need to have more of high school age and elementary school. I'd like you to be aware of some opportunities for helping expand and improve the lecture.